I used to think names were anchors, that as long as mine appeared somewhere on a list, on a sign-in sheet, on a reply all thread, I hadn't drifted too far. The email didn't come to me, it came to everyone else. Rhodes Family Strategic Session, Internal Alignment. The subject line was clean, corporate, nothing out of the ordinary. I only saw it because Graham had forwarded it to a thread we used years ago, back when Dad was still alive, and I was still asked for my opinion. It was sent to 17 people. My name wasn't one of them. I read it twice not to understand the content, but to confirm the omission. Lower on the list, Madeline Vanessa Cole, even Jared's wife Ashley, who once told me she found board meetings a bit soul-crushing. She was included. I wasn't. I didn't reply. I just opened my calendar and stared at the block of empty white space where the meeting would have gone. At some point, I texted my mother, "Is this intentional?" The typing dots appeared, disappeared, returned again. Then, "Cassidy, maybe it's best you don't come. It's not really meant for you anymore." I didn't respond. I locked my phone and set it face down beside the lamp. The light flickered once, then settled. On the mantel sat the family photo we took 12 years ago at the estate. I hadn't looked at it closely in a while. Everyone wore shades of navy and grey coordinated by Madeline, whose version of unity always came with a colour palette. I stood between Graham and Dad, slightly off-centre, holding a champagne flute I never drank from. The flash had caught my cheek at an odd angle, casting a blur over half my face. I'd always thought it was a technical flaw. That night, it looked more like erasure. There was no anger in my chest, no sharp edge begging to be hurled, just the sense that something had folded shut without making a sound. Later that evening, I opened the drawer in the hallway, the one no one else ever used, and took out the envelope from Walter. He'd mailed it after Dad's memorial, along with a note that read, "You'll know when to read it." I hadn't. Until now. The envelope was thick, sealed with wax not red, but navy, the kind of blue that matched my suit the day I was introduced as Director of Strategy, back when the title came with a voice. I didn't open it. I placed it on the table beside a chipped porcelain bowl filled with keys I no longer needed. One of them had RT East annexed, engraved in fading brass. It used to unlock the prototype lab. I tried not to think about how long it had been since anyone asked for the key. I turned on the kettle. The handle clicked in my hand, colder than I remembered. While the water boiled, I wiped down the counter with the hem of my sleeve. It left a faint mark I didn't bother scrubbing. The steam curled around the corners of the kitchen like a visitor that didn't need permission to arrive. I sat at the table with a plain mug and watched the wax on the envelope catch the overhead light. I didn't touch it again. My hands stayed wrapped around the ceramic, the heat pooling beneath my palms. Somewhere in the back of my mind I heard Graham's voice from last winter, clipped and tidy. "You've been kind of adjacent lately." I'd laughed then softly as if it were a joke we both understood, as if proximity could be mistaken for presence. He never liked confrontation, that much we shared. I remembered another moment not long after Dad's funeral, when I ran into Madeline in the hallway outside the boardroom. She didn't look up from her tablet. "You still have access to the internal reports." There was no inflection, just punctuation masquerading as concern. I'd nodded. She blinked slowly. "That'll need to change." There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, just the efficient removal of someone who wasn't screaming loud enough to be noticed. I reached for the small linen napkin tucked under the breadboard. It had a frayed corner. My grandmother stitched the initials ER into one edge, uneven and lovely. Eleanor Rhodes. I used to trace those letters while waiting for something to rise in the oven. I still don't know why I kept it. Some inherit titles. Others inherit loose threads. I left the mug half full. The taste didn't matter. I rinsed it without scrubbing. Set it upside down. Let the water run a little longer than necessary, the sound filling the room just enough. The phone buzzed once. I didn't turn it over. There was no plan to be made, no protest to organize, no need for a list of reasons why I should have been included. They already knew. That's what made it clean. That's what made it quiet. I looked once more at the photograph. The glass had a new scratch, probably from last week when I dusted too fast. My face remained obscured, just light, no outline. I thought of removing it, replacing it with something else, but I didn't move, let it stay, let it blur. Some absences don't ask to be filled, they just stay open. I used to believe showing up early meant something, not for attention, but to prove I understood what mattered before anyone asked. The year after my father died, I arrived 20 minutes before every strategy review. I walked the floor, once quietly straightened chairs that no one noticed were out of place, resynced the slide deck, flushed the coffee machine of yesterday's grit. Nothing heroic, just small acts to keep the room from forgetting how he used to keep it. At family dinners, I brought wine from a vineyard he liked in Oregon, always wrapped in plain craft paper twine tied loose. I placed the bottle at the center of the table like a placeholder for someone we had decided not to mention too often anymore. No one commented, not even Graham. Cass still likes her old traditions, was all Madeline offered once, with a tight smile that flattened before it reached her eyes. After the fourth quarter review, my title changed from Chief Strategy Officer to Senior Strategic Advisor. I signed the update without raising my hand. I told myself it was a temporary, a placeholder, a formatting decision. A footnote, not a removal. The nameplate on my office door stayed up for 2 weeks after that. When it disappeared, I noticed the faint square where the adhesive had protected the paint. I didn't ask to have it replaced. I kept the shadow. They moved my desk 2 floors down, closer to the project analysts. One morning, the office manager gestured toward the new space. "We figured you'd want more quiet to focus." There were no doors, just a pod, a shelf, a window with a view of the parking structure. I forwarded a gentle correction once to a misattributed report. My analysis had been published under Elliot's initials. The response from his assistant arrived minutes later. A single emoji in the hallway that afternoon, I passed Madeline. She didn't stop walking. "Legal trimmed the report for clarity," she said without looking up from her phone. "Nothing personal, Cass." There wasn't anything to say back. At the spring board dinner, I stood by the drinks table too long. Madeline approached in a black sheath dress, glass in hand. "You know we all appreciate your loyalty." Then she leaned closer. "Just remember the team needs clarity now. Stability. It's not a time for emotional shadows." I blinked once. She walked off before I responded. Later that evening, I wrapped the extra dinner rolls in a napkin. No one offered to take them home. They sat in my fridge for 4 days before I threw them away. The grey silk scarf she gave me for my birthday still hangs on the hook behind my door. I haven't worn it, the tag's still attached. Sometimes I reach for it, then close the door instead. Once I emailed a suggestion to refine the mid-year survey questions. I used neutral phrasing, offered options. The reply came from her assistant again. "We'll pass this along as time allows." I started keeping notes in a bound planner that no one else used anymore. Not strategic plans, just observations. How many times someone interrupted me mid-sentence. How often a deliverable was credited to a different name. The number of meetings I was left out of, but still prepared for. The final page has a list of phrases I heard more than once that year. Cassidy, we need you to be adaptable. You're part of the foundation, not the momentum. She's not disruptive, which is nice. You've always been so steady. At some point, being steady meant invisible. Mom once told me that being quiet is a form of respect. Don't speak unless it adds grace, she used to say. But grace is only recognized when the room still sees you. During a team offsite in Vermont, I offered to organize the breakout groups. The event lad nodded, scribbled something in a notebook, and later introduced Vanessa as the coordinator of logistics. I sat 2 rows back and took notes anyway. Afterwards, she thanked me in passing. I know you don't need credit. That's what makes you valuable. I still don't know what she meant by that pause. The little brass paperweight on my desk, a gift from my father, once had a tiny plaque engraved with my initials. Somewhere between one office move and another, it came loose. Now it just rocks gently if the desk shakes. I never reattached it. Sometimes I hold it in one hand while listening to meeting audio recordings. It balances better when I press down slightly, as if it needs weight to stay honest. There's an old pin on my bulletin board from my first patent with the company. The enamel's chipped at the edge. They stopped giving those out after 2015. No one remembers what the pin colors meant anymore. I do. That year, I used to think small things would be enough to hold my place. That if I didn't complain, didn't interrupt, didn't correct every name they forgot, someone would notice I was still there. No one noticed. I placed the scarf back on its hook last night, still unworn. It catches air when the windows open. Just enough to remind me it's there. Just enough to remind me who gave it to me and who they expected me to be when I accepted it. Some forms of effort leave no mark, and some silences don't earn anyone's trust. Not even your own. I think most people expect a moment, a line that's crossed, a sentence too sharp to take back, but I don't remember being pushed out. I remember drifting the way fog recedes without anyone noticing where it went. The envelope was thick ivory sealed in gold foil. It arrived with the rest of the family mail that week, stacked neatly by the front door. Graham picked his up without glancing. Mine slipped slightly from the bundle. The calligraphy on the front read, Graham and Madeline Rhodes. And below, in smaller script, and guest. I looked at the rest, each sibling, each spouse, each niece, their names written fully deliberately. Only mine came with the open placeholder, not even Cassidy, just a shape meant to be filled by someone else. At the wedding, they placed me at a round table near the speakers behind a floral column. The place card read, Cass +1. I came alone. No one asked who the +1 was supposed to be. At the family brunch 2 weeks later, I overheard Vanessa laughing with Madeline in the kitchen. At least she dressed the part this time. Then a pause. Still felt like a seat filler, though. The silverware in my hand trembled slightly when I set it down. No one noticed the knife turned slightly out of alignment. The first time I saw the company mentioned in Forbes after Dad's death, the photo showed Graham in the foreground. Madeline hand on his shoulder, Mom seated between them. The headline read, Rhodes Tech, a family legacy of precision and power. No one from editorial had contacted me. I found the article through a LinkedIn alert. Logan Wells had made a quote near the bottom. James always trusted Graham to carry the vision forward. There was no mention of the strategy department, or of the late nights I'd spent revising the white paper that closed our Series C funding round. I read the paragraph again, slower, thinking I'd missed something. Hadn't. The following week, I received a note from Clara in marketing. Could you resend your input for the corporate timeline doc? There's some confusion around which initiatives were officially yours. I replied with 3 bullet points, 2 hyperlinks, and no sentence longer than 9 words. She didn't respond. At Dad's 60th, we gathered in the back garden under rented lights. There was a microphone on a short black stand adjusted and readjusted for height. One by one they stepped up, Madeline first, then Graham, then Logan, then Vanessa. Your steadiness gave us structure. Your vision helped us aim higher. Your decisions built our name. No one mentioned the contingency planning I'd run that quarter, the one that saved the R&D budget during a temporary market freeze. When dessert came, I folded my napkin into squares and watched condensation gather on the base of my glass. At the end, Madeline leaned into the mic. From all of us, especially your children. Her eyes skimmed the room. We're honored to carry the Rhodes legacy forward. She didn't look at me. I left before they brought out the memory slideshow. Later that fall, I delivered a keynote at an industry conference in Denver. After the talk, I stood near the exit while attendees filtered past. One woman from a rival firm smiled as she shook my hand. That was generous of your family letting you speak under their brand. Letting me. That same day, a journalist published a summary in a local business column. Rhodes Tech continues its rise, led by Graham and his wife Madeline, whose poise and clarity reflect the company's values. I emailed the correction contact listed at the bottom. They never updated the article. In a quarterly meeting the following year, I walked to the podium to hand off a certificate of excellence to a junior engineer who had launched our new optimization model. I had mentored her for 6 months. I held the folder steady as she approached. As I handed it over, the room stayed quiet. No applause, just the clicking of laptop keys and the faint buzz of the HVAC. Behind me, I heard Logan's voice near the door. Smart choice having someone internal coach the new hires. Saves optics. I smiled as the engineer stepped away. She smiled back. I stood a moment too long before returning to my seat. A week later, I found a cream-colored envelope in my coat pocket, left over from the internal summit. Inside was a folded note. To our central leadership team, thank you for your vision and clarity. Your work speaks for us all. The names listed didn't include mine. No malice, just omission. Like the shadow of a chair you didn't know had been moved until the light shifted. On my desk, I kept a legal pad with no label. I wrote 1 word per page, sometimes just initials, other times dates. The first entry, CFW slipped invite. The last one I remember writing, March folder, no applause. I didn't show it to anyone. I never even turned to the back. There's a small dent in the left side of my file drawer, right where my foot nudges it open each morning. I stopped noticing it until last week, when the drawer stuck slightly. I knelt, realigned the rail, and stood again. The dent remained. Some marks don't heal. They just become part of how things open and close. I never expected my name to be in bold, just printed clearly somewhere near the middle. The paper was thick, heavier than what most people use for legal documents. Walter handed it to me without commentary, without ceremony. I read the original trust first, the one I remembered signing as a witness when I was 24, then the amendment, dated just a few weeks before the hospice took over. The handwriting was uneven but familiar. He had still signed it himself. A clause tucked near the end gave me exclusive rights to oversee the intellectual property attached to the company's founding patents. My name appeared in full. Cassidy Eleanor Rhodes. No initials, no abbreviations, not a placeholder. Walter cleared his throat once. I folded the page along the crease he had already made and slipped it into my bag. Nothing else passed between us. Back home, I logged into the internal company portal. I expected some version of buried access, a subfolder or disclaimer. Instead, under IP oversight, a single line appeared in grey intellectual assets, managed by current executive delegation. No names, no citation of the trust, no trace of the clause I'd just read. I clicked again. A red notice blinked across the screen. This profile is currently inactive. Underneath, status changed effective 0302 personal leave. That was the day I took Mom to her cardiology follow-up. I left my desk and took the elevator to the 6th floor. The badge scanner blinked red. I tried again. Same result. A small screen prompted, "Please contact administrator for access level review." The glass door leading into the executive hallway reflected my outline too clearly. Behind it, shapes moved a conference table, coffee cups, paper printouts. One figure gestured toward the projector screen. The edges of her scarf caught the light. I recognized the shape of Madeline's handwriting on the draft projected behind her. I turned away before the slide changed. At HR, the hallway still smelled faintly of citrus and copy paper. I knocked once on the open door. Erica looked up, recognition flickering in her face before she set her pen down. "Cass." I didn't expect. "I raised one folder," said. Nothing. She glanced at her monitor, then back at me. "There are thing above me," she finally offered. "I can't shift what's already been moved." Her voice stayed soft, like someone breaking bad news to a stranger at a bus stop. I nodded once. She didn't stand. The badge access failure wasn't surprising by then, but the way no one asked why I'd come back, that held its own weight. On the walk down, I passed the wall that once held our founder's gallery. My father's photo was still there, third from the left. They'd updated the frame. Beneath it, the placard had changed. Legacy Visionary. The date of his passing was engraved now. The line where Rhodes Family Innovation Stewardship once stood had been replaced with a quote from a marketing brief. Something about synergy and scalable futures. I stopped by my desk long enough to retrieve a single envelope. Not mine, his. Walter had handed me the key that morning. "Your father requested you open it privately," he had said. The safe was located in a deposit box 3 miles from the office. I didn't go there right away. I just held the key in my palm for a long time, feeling the weight of metal pressed into skin. At lunch, I sat in the parking lot across from Rhodes Tower. I didn't enter. I watched the revolving doors take in and release others. From a distance, everything seemed orderly. Inside, the architecture had changed. Years ago, Dad had told me titles don't keep you in the room. Trust does. He hadn't said what to do when both were gone. I glanced again at the login screen on my phone. Still inactive, still flagged, still marked as if I'd chosen absence. At the bottom of the legal document, Walter had given me a single sentence stood out. Centered, underlined once, if executive management deviates from outlined directives, fiduciary oversight reverts to designated heir. No one had told me. No one had asked. They simply removed the name and wrote a new one. When I returned to the office, no one looked up. I walked past my old desk and noticed the empty penholder still bore the initials CER in silver. The pen was gone. A new memo had been pinned to the wall. All third-party IP contracts must go through Rhodes Holdings. I stood there for a moment, long enough to be seen, not long enough to be acknowledged. Then Graham's voice floated from an open door nearby. "She won't challenge it. She never does. There was no emphasis, just the kind of certainty that doesn't need volume. The last thing I touched before leaving was the corner of the desk. Smooth lacquer, slightly warm from the light, still mine technically, but only in memory. Some names are erased gently, so gently in fact that no one hears the pen lift. There's a difference between being quiet and being absent. I used to think they overlapped. I didn't send a resignation letter. I didn't write a farewell email. I didn't ask for an exit interview or schedule a goodbye lunch. There wasn't anything to explain. After hours, the halls emptied faster than I expected. A few voices trailed off near the elevators. I stayed long enough to hear the last door click shut. The desk drawers didn't hold much. A dried-out pen with my initials etched in gold. A binder clip I had kept from a conference 4 years ago. 2 note cards from interns who never returned the next summer. A paper clip twisted into the shape of a star Graham had done that during a board meeting once passed it to me like it was a joke only siblings could understand. I didn't take the clip. I just looked at it once and left it where it was. I packed one thing at a time. The grey leather portfolio my father used in the early years, the one with the creased spine and faint ink blot inside the front cover. A soft-bound technical notebook that still smelled faintly of printer toner and citrus wipes. And the family photo, the one everyone had forgotten, existed because it had been replaced on the digital displays with headshots from the new leadership team. The glass on the frame had a faint diagonal scratch that cut across my mouth. I never tried to buff it out. I slid everything into a canvas tote. The bag still had a faint coffee stain on the lining from last December, when I'd carried a box of ceramic mugs to the holiday meeting, and no one thanked me for bringing them. I rinsed them out afterward alone in the kitchenette. One of the mugs chipped. I still kept it. When I walked through the side corridor, the motion sensor lights flickered on too slowly, as if the building itself was reconsidering whether I still belonged there. No one passed me. No one looked up. At the security desk, I paused. The badge was still clipped to the hem of my coat. I removed it slowly, placed it face down on the marble counter. The soft side of the Velcro touched the surface with a sound too small to be called anything. I didn't write a note. I didn't fold the lanyard. I left it how it fell. Behind the glass wall of the lobby, the trees were losing their leaves. A single brown leaf skidded across the walkway, twirled once in the wind, and slid toward the curb without resistance. I stood still long enough to see it go. The glass caught my reflection, faintly. No shape, just color. Nothing sharp enough to hold on to. My phone didn't ring. No message appeared. Not even a calendar notification. I didn't expect them to reach out. Still, the quiet felt like confirmation. The box in the back seat barely filled half the space. I buckled it in anyway. The roads were clear. No headlights followed. The house in Arlington had been closed up since the winter before Dad passed. I still had the keys worn thin from years of familiarity. The door creaked not from disuse, but from the same loose hinge it always had. Inside, the air didn't smell abandoned. It smelled like paper and time. The kitchen table still bore the faint ring of a mug that no one had wiped up properly. Not mine, hers. My grandmother always left tea to steep too long. She used to say bitter things stayed longer and taught more. I placed the photo on the mantel, not prominently, just to one side. I set the notebook on the desk near the window. I didn't plug in a lamp. There was dust on the shelves. I didn't rush to clean them. The silence had its own shape here, and it didn't press against me. I found a throw blanket still folded at the end of the bed. The fabric had thinned with age, but the hemline stitching was intact. I didn't know who had sewn it, only that it held. I took off my coat, hung it by the door, and set the tote on the chair without unpacking. Nothing in the bag required urgency. The ceiling creaked slightly as the temperature shifted. A single book leaned against the shelf's edge, almost tipping. I straightened it. No one called to check if I'd arrived. No one asked where I had gone. That was the answer. The next morning, I didn't set an alarm. I didn't open my email. I didn't measure my time against what anyone else needed. The day began without notice, the way most endings do. I didn't close the door behind me that night to prove a point. I just left it how it was latched but not locked. Some exits don't require an announcement, only the choice not to return. I hadn't realized how loud my life had been until silence became an option. The first few mornings, the floorboards startled me. The creaks came from nowhere in particular, like the house reminding me it still remembered how to hold someone. The heater sputtered, not broken, just unused. I stood near it until the warmth caught up with itself. The corners of the ceiling had small water stains, faded into the shape of things no longer there. I didn't repaint them. I didn't mind being reminded that even roofs need time to settle again. There was no alarm, no meeting reminders, no morning summary emails. I poured water into a steel kettle, the kind I had bookmarked for months, but never bought because someone once said electric ones were faster. I watched it on the stove without multitasking. At the store, I picked up things that made no claim. A linen tablecloth, stiff at the edges, a wooden tray with shallow grooves, a small potted orchid already missing one bloom. I liked that it didn't apologize for being slightly incomplete. The house didn't demand. I moved through it slowly, learning which light switches worked on the first try, which faucets needed coaxing. I found a drawer lined with old receipts from decades ago. I didn't throw them out. I stacked them neatly, returned them to where they were. In the mornings, I opened the notebook with Dad's schematics, not for revision, not for application, just to trace the way his mind once moved across a page. The margins carried numbers I couldn't decipher and arrows that led to nowhere. I touched the ink still bold in places and let it be enough. An envelope slid through the door one afternoon. Utilities addressed plainly. No message inside, just numbers and a return address. The ordinary kind of paper I hadn't held in years. I paid it without thinking twice, and for once no one else's approval was required. My phone lit up only once that week. If you need anything, I'm still here. Joan. Her name appeared without expectation. No emojis, no exclamation marks, just the sentence. I didn't write back, but I opened my smallest notebook and copied it onto the inside cover, just beneath an old grocery list. I didn't explain why I kept it. I just didn't want to forget someone had offered. I moved the table closer to the window, not because the view had changed, but because I liked how the light touched the edge of the plate in the mornings. I began measuring days not by deadlines, but by where the shadows fell on the floorboards at noon. I ate alone without setting places for anyone else. I folded the napkin once neatly, even when it wasn't being used. I wiped down the counter after every meal, not because someone might judge it, but because I could decide when it was clean. The first night, I lay awake and counted everything I hadn't said, not to make a list, but to see if silence had grown heavy or light. It didn't weigh anything. It just sat beside me, quiet but whole. I reread a letter Dad had tucked into the back of his manual, one never addressed to anyone. Just a few lines in his handwriting, the kind that slanted left when he was tired. Eventually, what you build doesn't need to be defended. It just holds. I folded it back into the page and closed the cover, not as a gesture, just to keep it safe. No one asked where I'd gone. No group chat pinged. No holiday plans circulated with my name included. I cleaned the window frame with a cloth cut from an old t-shirt. I left the smudge in the corner because it looked like a fingerprint. I didn't want it gone yet. The house began to settle with me. Or maybe I began to move more like it. Slowly. Without friction. At the edge of the bookshelf was a ceramic figurine I didn't remember buying. It must have been my grandmother's. A swan chipped at the beak. I didn't fix it. I placed it next to the plant and watched how the two looked toward different sides of the room. Nothing about them matched, and still they belonged. I found a single envelope with a return address from Rhodes Holdings. It was plain, no seal, no handwritten note. The document inside summarized a transition in oversight. My name didn't appear anywhere in the summary. The final page was signed in a rush. One corner of the ink had smudged slightly, the kind of thing that happens when someone is too eager to be finished. There was no sting, only the clarity of something now complete. I folded it once and placed it beneath the kettle. Not because it mattered anymore, just because the paper needed somewhere to stay. By the third week, I stopped checking the mailbox daily. If something important came, it would wait. I didn't make plans. I didn't call anyone. I brewed tea and let it cool before drinking. I stopped reheating it. I watched the steam drift upward, light as thread. It didn't ask to be noticed. It was enough to know I had chosen the cup, the table, the time. I learned to exist again, not for proof, but for presence, and I didn't need anyone to witness it. I used to think absence would make them remember, but sometimes it just makes space for new choreography, one where your part gets reassigned quietly like you were never needed to begin with. The email came mid-afternoon. No subject line, just the standard salutation. No greeting with my name. No reference to who I once was to them. The phrasing was clipped, rehearsed. We understand you may retain certain rights related to foundational patents. Cooperation on your part will support the company's integrity during the upcoming merger. Not even a dear Ms. Rhodes. There was a PDF attached, legal phrasing wrapped in civility like layers of gauze over something already necrotic. I read it once not for the content, but for the tone. Neutral, not quite dismissive, but nowhere near human. I didn't answer. 3 days later, Graham pulled up in the driveway. I heard the car before I saw it. His tires still made that small grind against gravel, like they always had. Some things don't update. He carried a grey box in both hands like it was something sacred, the kind of box used by that bakery downtown Dad used to visit for holidays. They wrapped their sweets in thick wax paper, folded with care, no tape, just a string. The box looked familiar. The string was tied wrong. Dad used to make a loop over not under. Graham stood at the door too long before knocking. I didn't rush. I opened it slowly, without words. He stepped in without being asked. The box stayed between us like a peace offering with no inscription. I thought you might want these, he said, placing it on the table I had cleared that morning. It's been messy. Everyone's trying to get ahead of the news. There's talk online. People notice when family doesn't show up. He didn't meet my eyes. Maybe it's time you came back, just for optics, to show unity. I looked at the box, still warm slightly, fogging the inside of the wax paper. No note, no handwriting, No mention of my name, just sugar wrapped in nostalgia and strategy. "Do you need me?" I asked, "or do you need the image of me?" He didn't answer. His fingers tapped the edge of the table once, twice, like he was timing something invisible. I watched the movement instead of his face. We all make compromises. That's what legacy is, Cass. The way he used the name, casual clipped, made it clear he was invoking familiarity, not offering it. He stood a few minutes longer, then turned toward the door, still not touching the box again. I didn't follow him out. The door clicked in its frame as if it had done it too many times before. I sat alone for a while. The smell of the pastries began to settle into the room, cinnamon butter, faint almond. My stomach didn't react. I picked up the box, heavier than I thought. I placed it back down. I didn't open it. Later, I moved it to the corner counter near the window where the sun wouldn't spoil it. Still, I didn't touch the string. That evening, I received another email. This one shorter, just checking if you've had time to review our proposal. Kindly confirm before Friday. No signature. Just Legal Department Roads Tech. I replied with a blank email. No message, just the original attachment unopened. The next day the phone rang once. I let it. I folded a napkin diagonally and placed it under my cup. No one else's voice interrupted. The kettle whistled quietly in the background. I let it whistle a second longer than needed before turning off the heat. Outside, someone had left a flyer wedged in the gate, some local repair service. The edges curled, the ink already fading. I brought it inside not because I needed it, but because it was real and didn't ask me to be anything. The next time my name appeared was in a headline. Roads. Tech faces. Backlash over legacy gaps amid merger. Below it, a photo from years ago, Madeline shaking hands with an investor, my mother just over her shoulder. My silhouette was in the background, half-cropped, barely visible. The caption read, "Unified Family Vision Through Generations." I turned the page. By the end of the week, I wrapped the bakery box in cloth and slid it into the pantry. Still unopened. Still untouched. I wrote the date in pencil on the side, not for expiration, just to remember when it arrived. I didn't answer the next email. I didn't return the next call. And no one came back again. Not to ask, not to insist. I didn't close the door loudly. I didn't lock it either, but I stood by it long enough to know it was mine to keep closed. I stopped explaining why I no longer answered unknown numbers. Some things don't need justification, just distance. The mornings began the same. I filled the kettle, not because I had to, but because I liked the sound of it warming. Evan would slide into the kitchen, barefoot hair, half asleep, clutching his dinosaur mug as if the world might tip without it. I packed his lunch in the same cloth bag, the one with a tear I hadn't sewn shut. He never complained. Neither did I. I walked him to school each morning. We didn't say much, just steps in sync, and the occasional hand squeeze when crossing a street. I used to arrive at meetings early, review every slide, check the lighting in the room before anyone else entered. Now I waited at the crosswalk, watching light fall on the pavement, not trying to fix it. Once a week, I volunteered at the second-hand bookstore 3 blocks down. I shelved by spine color rather than author, not because it made sense, but because it pleased my eye. There was comfort in arranging stories that weren't mine and touching paper that didn't expect anything back. The back room became my project. I cleared the dust from the shelves labeled old boxes by decade. My father's journals, diagrams, handwritten ideas still on graph paper, some with coffee rings, others with smudges where his thumb had lingered too long. I created an index, not for anyone else. Just in case one day I needed to remember where things began. A friend once told me healing was loud, visible, that it required shouting from mountaintops and burning bridges like flags. I didn't find that true. Some recoveries are measured in boiled water, in fixing a broken latch, without telling anyone it was ever loose. One afternoon, I received a letter handwritten uneven from Zach, a junior engineer I once mentored. I stayed after everyone else left, not because of the role, because once you looked at my flawed schematic and said, "Don't fix it yet. Understand why it bent." That changed everything. I just wanted you to know. I folded the letter carefully, slid it between the pages of an old brown notebook of my father's. The yard outside needed tending. I cleared the vines with gardening gloves that didn't fit quite right. I planted thyme along the edge, nothing symbolic, just something that made the kitchen smell like effort. One afternoon, my mother left a voicemail. "Your name still confuses the bank paperwork. Can you clarify that you're not part of the active holdings anymore?" No greeting. No, how are you? Just that tone, clipped and cool. I didn't call back. I highlighted the voicemail, labeled it documentation only, and moved on. I saw Madeline at the grocery store once. She turned toward the wine section too quickly. Her back was too straight. She didn't reach out. Neither did I. Some silences don't need revisiting. Evan asked me once, "Do we still have a family?" I stirred his cocoa before answering. "We have one. It's just a little smaller now." He nodded. That was enough. I stopped using the road's name on anything new. Letters came addressed to Ms. Rhodes, and I returned them unopened. I signed my name simply Cassidy. No initial, no tie, just the part I chose. When the Rhodes Tech Foundation announced a scholarship in honor of family innovation, I received an email. They wanted a quote, a memory, a blessing. "We're highlighting the lineage of progress," it read. "Your input would add warmth." I replied with one sentence. "Lineage only matters if it remembers everyone." They didn't write back. The green armchair near the window had a new stitch done by hand. The thread didn't match perfectly, but I didn't redo it. The imperfection felt honest. In the evenings I read. Not news, not emails, just essays and field reports from journals no longer published. I wasn't catching up anymore. I was catching breath. There were still days I remembered too much. How Graham used to bring me orange juice when I stayed late at the lab. How my mother's eyes would scan a room and land everywhere but on me. How Madeline once touched my shoulder and said, "Not everyone needs a spotlight. Some of us belong behind the screen." That stayed with me not because it hurt, but because I believed it once. I no longer do. I don't measure my life by roles or titles. I measure it by what I choose to repair. The faucet that used to leak now sings. The bookshelf no longer tilts. Evan's laughter echoes through the hallway as he pretends to be a T-Rex, knocking over laundry baskets. A neighbor knocked once, offering a pie. I wasn't sure who lived here. Now. She smiled. "I do," I said. That was all. There's a notebook on my desk now. It's mostly blank. I don't write daily, but sometimes when the tea is still warm and Evan is asleep, I jot things down. Not plans, not goals, just truths I've uncovered by doing nothing performative. One page holds only this: I am not what they remember. I am what I continue without them. And that is enough. They always wanted something final. A signature, a stamp, a box checked so the system could fold me into a footnote. I printed the document on thick paper, the kind my father preferred for contracts he believed in. The weight of it reminded me of those quiet evenings when he would fold a letter twice and press the edges with his thumbnail as if intention could be sealed into creases. The heading was clean, Intellectual Property Settlement Rhodes Holdings. Beneath it, a single line for signature, Cassidy Rhodes, former founding member, R&D Division. They didn't call. They didn't visit. Just a silent PDF sent by someone from legal with a faceless name. There was no mention of time served, no acknowledgement of the early mornings or the blueprints hand-drawn on napkins. Just this line, an erasure wrapped in formality. The ceramic mug I used every morning sat next to the printed document. It was chipped at the rim, the glaze worn thin where I held it. I never replaced it. There was something grounding about its imperfection, about the way it never needed to match anything else. I placed the paper beside it and didn't touch either for the rest of the day. By evening, the draft had curled slightly at the corners. The room held the faint scent of Earl Grey and pencil shavings. I sat at the oak table and opened the pen case my father gave me when I graduated inside his old fountain pen, rested in its velvet cradle. The brass was dulled, the nib slightly bent. Still, it worked. On plain cream paper, I wrote just one sentence. I do not contest. I do not consent. I simply no longer belong. No heading, no closing, just the weight of choice written in cursive. My handwriting was steadier than I expected. I didn't send it to a person. I uploaded it anonymously through the legal contact portal, one of those internal systems where everything gets filed, but nothing gets read unless it becomes inconvenient. No read receipt, no reply, no more relevance. There's a kind of clarity in knowing the door is already closed and choosing not to knock. In the back of the hallway closet beneath old linens and a faded blue quilt, I found the legal folder I'd tucked away months earlier. It held the official paperwork for my name change, Cassidy, Eleanor Whitlow. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about escape. It was about removing the frame they'd forced around me. My mother's maiden name had always felt unfinished, open-ended, without agenda. I didn't need a name tied to patents or public image. I needed a name that didn't arrive with expectations. The notary had asked if I was sure. I didn't explain. I signed. Some choices aren't performances. They're quiet recoveries. The day I received the updated documents, I didn't tell anyone. I placed them inside the same drawer where I kept my grandmother's scarf and a small envelope of pressed clovers from my son. Later that week, I walked to the family bank branch and returned the safety deposit key. The clerk didn't ask why. She just noted the closure, handed me a receipt, and moved to the next number in line. Clean. Efficient. Final. I lingered outside the building. The walls were still lined with marble, the same ones I used to lean against while waiting for my father's meetings to end. He'd come out with a half smile and a question hungry before taking me to the corner deli. That ritual had vanished long before he did. No one ever replaces ritual. They just stop showing up for it. At home, I scrolled through my contacts. Most names had already been removed, but one remained. Madeline Rhodes. No message history. No calls. Just the name still there like a shadow on a clean wall. I tapped the edit button, hovered, then pressed delete. The phone gave no warning. It just accepted the decision. There was no satisfaction in it, just space. A week later, a courier envelope arrived unsigned. Inside was a framed photo from the last Rhodes Tech conference I attended. I was at the edge of the group, smiling blazer, slightly crooked, holding a presentation folder. The others stood closer together. My name wasn't listed on the back, only a typed line, R&D Innovation Team Q1 Briefing. I slid the photo behind a stack of books, not hidden, not displayed, just displaced. Some things don't need confrontation, they just need release. I vacuumed the living room. I watered the plant I'd almost forgotten by the window. I lit a candle I hadn't used in months. The scent was faintly herbal, like something unfinished. That night, I didn't draft a rebuttal. I didn't write a journal entry. I didn't update my records. I placed the fountain pen back in its box. I folded the letter once then again and tucked it behind the mug with the chipped edge. Let the paper yellow there. Let the ink fade without drama. I closed the last tab on my browser. Rhodes Holdings' website still had no mention of me. I didn't expect one. History I'd learned is curated. What mattered now wasn't what they remembered. It was what I chose to preserve. At the edge of my desk sat a small square of glass, once part of a lab sample case. I used it as a paperweight. One corner was cracked. Still it held things down. I rested my hand on it before turning off the light. Not everything broken needs repair. Some things are meant to be let go quietly, completely, without announcement. I used to believe there would be a moment, clear, precise, when everything would feel resolved. But nothing ever announces its own quiet. It arrives without ceremony and stays only if you let it. I didn't open the curtains right away. There was no one to see the house from the outside and no one waiting on the inside for a sign that I was awake. The light came in eventually, anyway, bending through the slight ripple in the old glass pane, softening on the uneven wood of the floor. The kettle took its time boiling. I didn't rush it. The mug I reached for had a hairline crack along the handle. I'd stopped noticing when exactly it appeared. It held together. That was enough. I poured the water slowly, watching the steam rise as if it had somewhere it needed to be. The tea leaves didn't swirl, they sank. Settling had become its own form of motion. The note on the fridge was simple. Lunch is in the second shelf drawer. Love you. I folded the paper twice before pressing it under a small magnet, shaped like a pine cone. Evan wouldn't be home until much later. He never forgot the notes, even when he pretended not to see them. I didn't check my phone. I hadn't in days. It was still plugged into the wall near the door, face down, silent. No alerts, no missed calls, no new names blinking into the dark. I had removed the last family contact 2 weeks ago, not as a gesture, just as a quiet correction. There had been an envelope waiting on the porch one morning. No postage, no sender. I didn't open it for 3 days. Inside a printed letter from Rhodes Holdings, an invitation to reconsider involvement in an honorary advisory capacity. The wording was careful, polished, stripped of anything personal. I folded it again, not sharply, and slid it between the pages of a spiral-bound notebook, the one I used only when I wanted to remember what I once loved about building systems from scratch. No reply was needed. Silence could be a form of response. I reached for a scarf I had never worn. Beige, soft, still carrying the scent of the paper it was wrapped in. I draped it across my shoulders. The gesture felt small, intact. Not performance, not resistance, just a moment given to myself. The back door stuck slightly when opened. It always had even before the hinges rusted. I didn't oil them. I let them sound. Not out of neglect, but recognition. This place had its own memory of being used. A leaf had settled on the step. Not yet brittle, not quite green. I nudged it aside with my foot, not to dismiss it, only to see if it would move. It did. There was a file in my desk drawer, marked Correspondence Unsent. Inside a typed letter, declining re-entry into the Rhodes Family Advisory Trust. Not dramatic. No accusations. Just lines like, "Scaffolding, I do not contest your rights. I simply no longer share them. I am not withholding contribution. I am keeping what is mine. I wish no ill. I simply wish distance. I didn't print it on letterhead. I didn't sign it. I folded it back into the envelope and slid it behind the drawer panel. It didn't need to be sent to have weight. At the bottom of the drawer was an old ID badge with my photo, mid-30s, pulled back hair, eyes caught between awareness and rehearsal. I flipped it over. My name printed clearly beneath the company logo. The laminate had started to peel. I didn't throw it away. I just didn't wear it anymore. I spent the rest of the morning fixing the wobble in the kitchen stool. The leg had been loose for months. One screw slightly misaligned kept shifting the balance. I sanded the edge by hand until it fit smooth and flush. When I placed it back on the floor, it stood still. Not level, not perfect, but still. There had been a time I would have called someone, asked for help, waited for the right tools, overthought the method. Now, I just worked through the problem with what I had. Sometimes it was enough. Sometimes it wasn't. I stopped measuring days by their outcomes. A message came through the community board email. A student from the nearby college asking if they could interview me about early patent processes in modular software architecture. "Your name still comes up in our foundational coursework," it ended. I reread that line, then closed the tab without replying. I didn't feel erased. I also didn't need to be reintroduced. Lunch was a bowl of soup from the night before. I didn't reheat it. I ate it cold slowly with the spoon that still had a slight bend from when Evan once tried to make a slingshot. I hadn't fixed it. It worked fine, just differently. The mail carrier waved from the street. I didn't wave back. Not out of dismissal, just because the wave wasn't meant for me. It didn't need to be. The living room held a soft chill by late afternoon. I didn't turn on the heater. I added a second pair of socks, the wool ones I kept from Vermont, frayed at the ankle, still warm. On the bookshelf, tucked behind a row of paperbacks, was a single photograph of my father and me at a science fair. His hands resting on my shoulders. Mine on the edge of the table beside a model I built from wire and recycled glass. Neither of us smiled for the camera. We weren't those people. I left the photo there not to remember something better, but to remember how it was. There were no visitors. I hadn't had any in weeks. The porch stayed swept. The garden didn't bloom out of season. Still, I watered the soil every third day, not to grow anything grand, but because some things respond better when they're not forgotten. By evening, the air turned sharp. I lit a candle, not for ambiance, not for reflection, just to see its shape soften against the wall. It flickered quietly. I didn't watch it. I just let it burn. I didn't journal. I didn't reflect out loud. The pages of my notebook remained blank that day, not because I had nothing to say, but because sometimes choosing silence is how you begin to listen again. I folded the laundry slowly. The shirt Evan had outgrown still smelled faintly of cedar from the drawers. I placed it into the giveaway pile. I kept the tag he'd written his name on in shaky block letters. I didn't need the shirt. I just kept the part that mattered. Before bed, I stood by the open window. The air was still. One branch tapped gently against the screen. A moth hovered briefly in the frame before drifting away. No meaning in it. Just motion. I didn't think about legacy. I didn't think about closure. I let the idea of both pass through me without latching on. My life no longer needed to prove it existed. The scarf was still on my shoulders. The mug was still on the table. The day was almost done, and I hadn't performed once. No declarations, no redemptions, no reclaiming of spaces that never offered a place to begin with. I closed the window. I didn't latch it. And that was enough.